Okay, we are wrapping up First Samuel this evening so that next week we can turn our attention to Second Samuel. And just to reiterate, these two books were never really meant to be two separate books. The only reason there is a First Samuel and a Second Samuel is scroll length, but really this tells one continuous story. But this does mark a pretty good transition point. We're in this third little square right here. We've seen Saul slowly starting to descend into madness. We've seen the
It's flat.
slow rise of David, and we're going to keep seeing David rise. But I want you to notice something about these two curves that I think is pretty clever from the Bible Project. This one's pretty sharp, and then it comes down like screaming fast. David's rise is a little bit slower. And I think tonight you're going to see why that's the case. Why does David take a little bit longer to reach his peak? And then, unfortunately, in the reading, I believe for next week, we're going to get to one story that just doesn't bode well for David. So there are hints along the way in tonight's chapters that kind of give us an idea of what might be David's downfall. We'll point that out when we get there. But we are going to see that in all actuality next week. So before you get to, a tattoo of David on your wrist or shoulder, just make sure you finish the story first. We pick up in chapter 23. Right after the story, you'll remember we talked briefly about at the end of last week where Saul just goes crazy. He murders an entire community of priests and their families, and just for spite, all of their oxen because they had helped David. So, what we're going to see today is a comparison again between the two kings, more games of cat and mouse, and the structure of three of the chapters in particular are going to tell us a little bit about both of these characters, positive and negative. But before we get to chapter 24, where that really starts, first we have this story about David who's going to help out a group of Israelites, a community of Israelites. Now, what if you were the king of Israel? What are some of the things that you should be doing for your people? What would you think? We've seen this in the David and
Protecting them
Goliath
from
story.
conquest.
Do what?
Protecting them from conquest.
Protecting them? Yeah. What else? Providing for them? Protection, provision,
What about their spiritual journeys?
guiding them, pointing them toward God. These are all things that the king of Israel ought to be doing. And I want you to look in these stories. Who's the one doing them and who's not doing them? So David finds out that the Philistines are coming against this Israelite community, robbing them and all these things. And what does he immediately do? He inquires of God, not once, but twice. David, over and over again, we've seen in the story thus far, is before he goes to any rash action, he first seeks God's guidance. God, what do you want me to do? This is the exact opposite of what we've seen Saul do, where Saul just pretends to do it and then just goes and does whatever Saul really wants to do. So David asks God what to do. God tells him exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to give the Philistines into your hand. Go after them. David does, and he strikes the Philistines with a great blow. And he what? Saves the inhabitants of Keilah. David is the one in this story acting like a king. We just saw how Saul is acting, destroying his own people. David is now depicted as the one who's saving the people. Saul finds out what David has done, and what does he do? He doesn't go, "Oh my gosh, I should have been doing that. I should have been protecting my people." No, he goes, "Great. Now I know where David is. I'm going to go and get him." And so Saul summons all the people to war. Do you remember what Samuel warned the people about very early on that the king would do if they got a king for themselves? Conscript their men into war for their petty grievances. This is exactly what Saul is doing. David isn't meaning Saul any harm, and he's saving the people. But Saul is so blinded by his own rage that he summons the people to war for his own petty grievances. And David goes once again before God, and just look at what he says. Your servant has surely heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. David knows not only is Saul going to hurt him, he's going to hurt the whole city for saving him or for helping him. And David wants to know, will the men of this community give me to Saul to save themselves? Is Saul coming? And what are these people going to do? And the Lord tells him, yep, the people are going to surrender you. So David flees, which is just a tragic tale all in itself. Elizabeth pointed out that there's an entire psalm dedicated to this moment and the betrayal that David feels that this people that he rescued are now going to turn him over to the false king. And we could spend a whole hour just on that alone about betrayal and what it feels like for the people that the anointed rescues to then turn on him, because I think we see that again in Jesus. And then we enter into this cat and mouse game. Saul is going to pursue David into the wilderness. What do we know? We talked about this last week. What do we know about the wilderness? What does the wilderness represent in the biblical story?
A
Time
test.
of testing.
Testing. Are
Testing.
we going to see both David and Saul tested in these stories? Absolutely.
Yes.
David is going to be tested more than once. In fact, the testing is what we're going to see in the structure of the next three chapters. So David goes into the wilderness. Saul finds out where he's hiding and he comes to them, and we get all of these cat and mouse stories. But what I really want to get up to, David ends up in the strongholds of En Gedi. And I love what Elizabeth pointed out about this word in
Oh, yeah.
Hebrew. You can rearrange the letters of En Gedi, and it forms the garden, the garden. So we have this garden wilderness-like scene. In case you're wondering why it would be a wilderness and a garden, this is what it looks like. There are caves built into the side, some natural, some probably dug out by humans given the shape of them. And David is hiding among these caves. So lots of little caves in the middle of the wilderness. But somehow we're told that this is also a garden, and that will come into play. Now, there's three chapters in this little vignette that we're about to get. Chapter 24, spoiler alert, David will spare Saul's life in the cave. Chapter 26 will be David sparing Saul's life in the encampment again. And then we get this chapter 25 where we have this foolish guy who doesn't recognize who David is, and David is going to have another test. And we'll talk about what that test looks like here in just a second. So, whatever that test is the focal point of this new chiasm that we're talking about here. Two stories where David is going to spare Saul's life, though he's given a chance to destroy it. And then let's talk about what happens in that middle scene when we get there. So, chapter 24, Saul goes into one of these little caves that we saw to relieve himself. And David, it just so happens to be, because God loves humor, I'm convinced that the scene or the cave that Saul finds his way into to relieve himself is the very same cave where David and his buddies are hiding out. And so while Saul is preoccupied, right, David has a chance to kill him. Look at what his soldiers say. Behold, this is the day where God has said, I'll give you your enemy into your hands. You shall do to him as it seems good to you. Where have we seen stories in the Bible where people have done whatever seems good to them?
Judges.
Judges,
First false
absolutely.
story. Genesis.
First false
Exodus.
story. I mean, it's all over the place. Is it typically seen as a good thing or a bad thing when humans do whatever seems good to them?
Bad.
This is bad.
Never good.
This is the voice. You know how you have like the angel and the devil on one shoulder, right? This is the bad guy chirping in David's ear. This is your chance. Do what seems good to you. It's an invitation to temptation, I think. This is a test. And David arose and he cuts off a corner of Saul's robe. And he says, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, that I should kill him. He's the Lord's anointed. To put out my hand against him, he is the Lord's anointed. He says this twice. What's the irony in this statement? That Saul would be the Lord's anointed. Is he?
Not now he isn't because David is.
No, David is. But David is respecting Saul is still king. And he is honoring the one that God had anointed here at one point in time. I kind of see this as like, you know how we call past presidents president, even though they're not the president anymore? It's kind of like that in my mind. But David is saying, I am not going to be the one to cause this man harm. He was the Lord's anointed. I'm not going to be the one to defeat him. And so David, when Saul leaves, David follows him out and he gives this whole speech. Hey, I could have just killed you, but I didn't. So can you stop chasing me? Is essentially what he says. Yeah, some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I don't mean you any harm. Can we get over this whole thing that we've got going on? And what is Saul's reaction to this? Saul says, you are more righteous than I. He weeps. He says, you have repaid me good where I have repaid you evil. What Saul meant for evil, David has repaid with goodness. Hold on to that. We're going to see that come back. And you have declared this day, you have dealt well with me. Saul literally says, you have done good to me. David passes this test. And now behold, Saul says, I know that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Saul admits what we've all kind of suspected he knows, that David is the one who's going to be king. Now, if this is where the story ended, it would be pretty good, wouldn't it? Saul recognizes that David is going to be king. David trusts that God is going to be the one to deal with Saul and that he's not going to touch him. But this isn't where the story ends. And we get this middle story here. Um, Samuel has died. We're just dropping the bucket little knowledge here, which means what? What role did Samuel play in the story?
He
Prophet,
was a prophet.
He's a prophet. Um, did we see
judge.
Anointed the two kings.
he anointed both kings? Yep, he's a judge. When the kings are struggling, who do they go to for guidance?
The prophet
They go to
or
Samuel.
the seer,
So,
counselor.
yep, Samuel being dead is another reminder that who are these kings going to trust to guide them forward and how they're going to deal and make decisions. So just little
Well, it
drop
should
in
be
the bucket
God,
here.
but it's not.
Well, I think Samuel and God are almost interchangeable because going to Samuel is, in essence, like going to God. He is the prophet who is speaking on behalf of God. So we get this little story, and this is a very good moment to remind us that the Bible often speaks in literature. This story is almost like a parable in the middle of David in the wilderness in this cat and mouse game with Saul. How is he going to respond to his enemy? We've seen some good, but is there a chance that things could go poorly? This story kind of sits us in between and tells us a lot about all the characters involved. And each character represents someone else, especially Nabal. So, Nabal, we're told, is this very rich man, businessman. He owns all of these sheep, thousands of goats, and he has this wife named Abigail. Nabal's name literally means idiot, which is one of the ways we are clued in that this is probably not like the realist historical story. Because if you're a parent, my hope is that you would not name your child idiot, right? That kind of feels a little wrong, like you're setting them up for something bad. So maybe this wasn't Nabal's real name. Maybe the author is doing something clever here. But either way, we have idiot and the beautiful one, Abigail, who's good, beautiful, discerning wisdom. We have foolishness and wisdom, parable coming on here. David comes to Nabal. He sends his servant to act as a go-between, a mediator. And David wants to know if Nabal can give them some much needed supplies in favor of the protection that David has offered his shepherds as they have been around him in Carmel. And basically, what David is going to say here is, I've done good to you. Now, can you repay me good? And we think this is kind of like, well, David, he didn't ask you for this. So why do you care? Why are you doing this? But this would have been a very common practice in the ancient world. David has offered a service out of the goodness of his heart. So the laws of hospitality would demand that you do something kind in return. And we see that Nabal is very wealthy. He's about to sit down at a feast. It's not like he doesn't have something to give. David's not asking for much. He's just asking for help. And we know that Nabal has the help, but will he have compassion? That's the question. So this is Nabal's response to David's servants. Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? What are you talking? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. This is a very tongue-in-cheek answer. I don't know this David. He's not my king. He's the servant of a king I know. This fool, literal Nabal, fool, idiot, refuses to recognize God's rightful anointed king. Who else in the story refuses to acknowledge God's rightful king? Who do you think?
Oh,
Saul.
Saul.
Over and over again. He does it and then he goes back on it. He does it and then he goes back on it. So this is why in the story we're meant to equate Nabal and Saul. Um, shall I take my bread and water and my meat that I have killed for my shears and give it to men who come from I don't know where? Nabal refuses to have compassion on the stranger and the sojourner in his land. Um, and there's so much we could say about this. You know, where are we called to give out of our excess to help those in need, right? I don't know about you, but are there times where we're tempted to say, you know, I worked for this. I'm not going to give you something that I worked for. Who are you? This is a whole episode about having compassion on those who come to you for help. And we see that Nabal has zero. We're going to see later in the story, towards the end of tonight, if we get there, David is the opposite of this. He does have compassion, even in one of the most tense moments in this story. David stops and has compassion on someone in need. David hears about this response, and what is his reaction? He's very chill in this moment, right? He takes a deep breath and he composes himself. No, not at all. David says, "All right, you're going to do this to me. Strap on your swords, guys. We're going to go wipe them all out." Now, what do you think about this moment? Is this like a notch in the positive direction for David, or is this kind of like a little wobble in his upward journey of becoming king? What do you think?
A
Wobble.
wobble.
Wobble, wobble, exactly. This is a moment where we're seeing David act in a way that's uncharacteristic of what we've seen of him so far.
Wait, he didn't seek God's guidance.
Yeah, in the Goliath story, and even in the story we've seen just this past chapter, David's going to spare Saul's life, or he did, believing that God will be the one to execute justice. Now, in this story, what's David's initial reaction? Who's going to execute justice? David. Is that the way it's supposed to go?
No.
No, we're supposed to be back up here. David is supposed to be trusting that God is the one who will deal with his enemies. And that's kind of the centralized question of these three chapters. When someone messes with you, when someone wrongs you, what do you do about it? Do you allow God to be the one to bring about justice in the world, or do you do what's good in your eyes and take justice for yourself? And here we're like, oh no, David is preparing to take justice in on himself. Who is going to save the king from himself in this moment? And what do
Abigail.
you know? The beautiful, wise Abigail
Yep.
comes to David's aid. And I love Matt taught about this at the men's lunch, I believe, today,
Yes.
saying, who are the people in your life who, when you are flying off the rails, that call you to like calmness and bring you back to center and help you make wise decisions? If you don't have an Abigail in your life, you need to find one.
Yep.
All of us need an Abigail in our life, and all of us are called to be Abigail for someone else. This is what Matt taught me this week in our Cornerstone meeting. I love it. It's a beautiful, beautiful example of this story. So we're going to move through this one kind of fast. Abigail comes to David and she is going to bow down before him. We see David, what is his fault? This man, Nabal, has returned me evil for good. What we expect in the story is for if you do good to someone to get good in return. And just like Saul, David has done good to Nabal, and Nabal is going to return that for evil. That's the problem here. Um, where, okay, let me make sure there's, oh, real quick, fun little side note here. It's easy for us to miss this in the English version of this. But David says, God do so to the enemies of David and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him alive. Now, in the King James Version, it says it this way. If I leave of all that pertain to him by morning light, any that pisseth against the wall. Where have we seen a story recently where there is a man standing against a wall relieving himself?
All on the
24
Saul in the
Saul.
cave.
Yes, exactly. So this is just another little moment where the author is drawing these stories together and saying, okay, hold on, David. In the last story, you were willing to believe that God is going to be the one to execute justice, that you weren't required to take Saul's life. Now, you're kind of going back on that. And again, here comes Abigail. She's going to say all the right things. Hey, I'm the mediator. Take me instead. Put the guilt on me. We didn't know. He didn't know. Um, don't let this lead you to bloodshed. And just, stay your hand, essentially. Forgive us. Forgive the trespass of your servant. And then she says an amazing line. For the Lord will certainly make my Lord, aka David, a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. What is she reminding him of?
David and
Goliath.
Goliath.
Goliath, when he slung the sling. Hey, remember what it's like to fight with God on your side? You don't have to do this. You don't have to do this. And David is overcome. He gets it. And instead of being judge and executioner, David is willing to go back to the promise, and David relents and allows God to be judge and we'll see executioner. I hope I spelled that right. Does this make sense? Do you see how these stories are kind of falling together, one right after another? Test in the wilderness, test in the wilderness, and we'll have a third one here in just a moment. Um, Meanwhile, we get a portrait of the idiot who's holding a feast, again, being shown as someone with excess, who's holding tight to their stuff, unwilling to let it go. And we're told his heart died within him. Everyone in the story sees this as the Lord's justice. Exactly what we've said. God is the one who will decide when your time is up and when you're deserving of death and whether or not you get forgiveness. All of that comes from the Lord. It is not ours to take on ourselves. David sees all of this as the Lord He's so grateful. He takes Abigail to be his wife. Not another great notch in David's belt. You could potentially cast this as Abigail is a widow. What is she going to do now without a husband? Is he protecting her? I don't know. Maybe. I have a hard time believing that because what do we know David's weakness to be if you know where the story is going, right?
Women.
Women.
Adultery.
I
I,
have a question.
yeah, absolutely.
Uh, does David write a psalm about this story?
Earlier on, he writes a psalm about the betrayal. I don't know if he writes a psalm about this one. Maybe.
About Abigail and this taking her as his wife and the
It's
choices
possible.
that
Look,
I just,
look it up
I
and
didn't know.
see. Somebody look it up and see if there's a psalm attributed to this moment. Um,
All right, thank you.
Isn't he without a wife right now?
no, he has
No,
one
no,
wife.
no, hasn't she been taken from him?
Not
No.
yet. That comes at the end of this chapter.
I thought it was
Both
there.
of them are going to be taken.
Michelle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now, he
Michelle.
did have a wife, Michal, Saul's daughter, but
Yeah.
we're told here at the end of 44 that Saul is a little petty. And Saul took Michal, who loved David, away from him and gave her to someone else.
Yeah.
So Saul's pettiness is willing to break up a family for him not to be related to David and associated with him. It's just interesting. Here's the other side of this coin that we've been kind of dancing around. David has another opportunity to kill Saul while he's lying in his encampment. We see a little bit of foolishness here, just like Nabal, because what is a king doing? Sleeping in an encampment with not a single guard on duty. Does that strike you as wisdom here? So we have a king who there's this wise woman who's kind of standing in the gap and protecting him from foolish decisions. Meanwhile, we have the fool Nabal here at his camp, and there's no one there to protect him. No wise woman who's helping him. In fact, all his soldiers are passed out around him. So it's easy for David to sneak up again. David says to his priest, who's like, please, can I just put an end to this guy? I'm sick of being on the run. David says, nope, same thing. He's learned his lesson again. He goes back to saying, I am not going to be the one to be judge and jury. God, this is God's. This is God's. And so no man saw it or knew, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them. We could probably talk for another hour about this story because where have we seen a deep sleep fall upon someone in the middle of like a really important moment? This is Abraham.
Creation, wasn't it? Man.
Abraham in the covenant story,
Yeah.
where when it's time to walk between the aisles, and Abraham is going to agree to the covenant promises to take them on himself and the consequences if he breaks it, God says, nope, you go to sleep. I'm going to take all of that. So here we see God's king in a deep sleep again. Again, just so interesting how all these stories piece together. Saul recognizes David's voice, and David once again, what is going on? What do I have to do to show you that I don't mean you harm? Can we not be friends? And Saul weeps again. Again, he says, I have acted foolishly. In other words, who's he acted like? An idiot, like Nabal. He is Nabal in this story. He's acted like an idiot. He hasn't recognized the king. And David says, here's the king. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord gave you into my hand today, and I would not put my hand out against the Lord's anointed. The irony of this is in the very last stories of today, we're going to see that Saul is rewarded for his unrighteousness. In other words, he's going to end up dead because he just couldn't bring himself to trust, like David is trusting now, that God is the one who will help him fight his battles and that will requires his faithfulness and loyalty. Saul never gives his loyalty past the time where we started to see him fall. Now we're going to get into a second set of stories that I find really interesting and another notch in the wobble belt of David. Okay. David is convinced, even though he and Saul are having these bright moments where Saul is recognizing what he's doing and it seems like everything's going to be okay. David is not convinced. He's not sold, and I think that's probably fair. Um, where does he go to seek refuge?
The Philistines,
Yeah, he goes. This is bold,
the enemy.
y'all. I mean, you are responsible for the death of Goliath, their like champion. You killed 200 of them and took their foreskins back to Saul. There's a song about you that you've killed, tens of thousands, and that's the people you go to when you're looking for refuge. That's pretty bold. That's pretty bold. And I wonder if there's a little bit of the exile story in here where David is going where he shouldn't go. I think this might be a little notch in his belt of David, you're the king of Israel. Why are you going to the Philistines? Why are you seeking refuge and protection with your enemies? You should be in Israel. I just
Well,
and yeah,
is that a part of the test, don't you think?
I think this is a part of the test. And I think this is an episode where David is once again going off the rails. And we're going to see this time it's God who pulls him. Actually, in the first story, it's Abigail. In this story, I think it's a combination of people. I think God helps orchestrate this moment, but I also think that the foreign king has a little bit to do with this and his advisors too. But either way, David goes and seeks refuge with the Philistines in Gath, of all places, where Goliath was from. And David is going to hang around there. And we get a couple of stories, specifically two, that tell us that David is being a little bit slippery. He's kind of like other figures who are going to be a little tricksy with what they're doing. First, David tells they go and they're given their own little place in the Philistine kingdom. And David is going to raid some of the surrounding encampments of Philistines and other neighboring nations, I believe. And when the king asks him, like, what have you been up to? Where have you been? Then David is going to say, "Oh, like I've been raiding the Israelites. I've been going and raiding them." And the king's thinking, "Oh, he's made himself a stench. He's been a nuisance to his own people, so surely he's loyal to me." But has David been raiding the Israelites? No. So
No.
we're seeing David bend the truth a little bit in the name of survival. And he's going to do that, I think, again at the end of this next chapter. So here we have the Philistines once again gearing up for war, only this time David, the hero of the Israelites, is poised, it looks at least, to fight for the wrong side. And I don't know, it's unclear to me in the story. We're not given a window into David's mind whether David fully intends, at least it reads like he does, fully intends to fight against his own people on behalf of the Philistines. And what I'm not quite sure about is whether David himself is looking for a way out of this or whether God is going to orchestrate events to give him a way out of it. Does that make sense? What do y'all think here? Like, what do you read in this story? Do you read a willing David participant or do you read a slippery guy who's going to try and get out of this?
I'm like
I
his-
think he's
I'm-
just being
He's just trying to
slippery.
get out of it.
Yeah, slippery guy.
Slippery guy. Bill, what did you say?
I'm like his commanders. I don't trust him.
Yeah, I don't think that you would if he killed a whole bunch of your people.
Um,
Who else chimed in?
I think he's just a young guy still growing and he's tussling with what's on the left and what's on the right. He's just being
Yeah.
bounced between the two,
Yeah.
So
But Rick, this is the mortal enemies of the Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
yep, exactly.
Yep.
I mean,
But-
that's called traitor usually.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Alex,
But,
I mean, is he a traitor?
As
Elizabeth, what were
Elizabeth
you gonna
pointed
say?
out, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Elizabeth, what were you going to say?
I was just going to ask if you could go back to like three thoughts ago. What was his motivation to go into the Philistines? That was an escape from Saul, even though he had
Yes.
spared his life twice, he still thought Saul was enough of a credible threat that he needed to go to the Philistines through
Well, I mean,
into,
let's look at the evidence from David's point of view. Saul just in chapter, what was it, 24, recognized that David is the king. And yet, not a chapter later, two chapters later, he's back to hunting him again. It's kind of like when Saul tried to spear him to a wall and then was, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I won't do it again. And then he does it again. Saul doesn't have the best track record of holding to his
yeah.
promises.
So
Okay.
I guess I see that, but then David has encountered him twice
Hmm.
and had that. So why would he not think that he is, more clever, more dominant, more
Right.
this, more that? Like, I guess I'm trying to think like was he really, really, really thinking he needed to flee? Or was there when you mentioned he was like a trickster, I started thinking like what else was he thinking? Like was he
Yeah.
I don't know. It
Well,
just
and
seems
that's
weird that that's what he would like his go-to or his default would be, oh, just go like make bed with the Philistines.
yeah, and we've
That
seen him
seems
do this
weird.
before. He went to the Philistines, was it last week's reading too? I think that this is a moment of doubt for David, right? He all along he's trusted that God would be with him in the wilderness, just like the other Israelites in the. Have we seen God's people being provided for and protected in the wilderness, and yet they still have doubts and want to
Yeah,
go back to where they
sure,
were?
sure.
I think this could be a retelling of that story. We see David gradually reliving the story of the Israelites. I think this is a moment just like in Israel in the wilderness where David is doubting. Is God going to protect? Maybe I need someone else to protect me. I think this is a
Mm,
wobble. I really do. The more I process it, especially right here with y'all, I just don't see this as David being the David of Goliath, like the David who
yeah.
stood up against Goliath or who was willing to keep running around the wilderness believing that God would help him. I see this as a David who's fleeing for some help from somewhere else. And it works. When Saul finds out that David's in Gath in the Philistine territory, he no longer sought him. And what does this tell us? He was seeking him again. Saul is not going to give up until David
Yeah.
is dead. And the
Mm,
only thing that stopped him was David doing this. And so David is acting for his own survival. We can't fault him that. But instead of continuing to believe that God is with him, he goes to his enemies.
Well,
yeah, okay, that
maybe
makes
he
sense.
realized now that he's got all these people that he needs to protect too.
That's right. Could he be? And I'm
And
not
he's
saying it's
looking,
an easy decision to keep wandering in the wilderness.
yeah, and he's looking for a place they can house up for a while and go raid some people and get some stuff.
Which
And
also you gotta
well,
question, is that the best you, by the way, he kills them all. All that when he goes and raids, he wipes out the village so that
well,
there's no one to witness and tell the king what he's really up to.
he
Slippery David.
wouldn't have time to raise sheep or to raise crops or anything else. I mean, he's been a
Yeah.
vagabond, you know.
It's almost as if, Bill, what you're saying is he would have had to have depended on someone else to provide for him in the wilderness.
That's right. That's right.
And who do we know who's supposed to
God,
be
we
doing
know,
that? And
right?
instead, he's going to go into enemy territory and make a living for himself.
Well, it might be that the fact of having all these people depending on him weighs on him too. You know,
It's kind of like what
I give him
Moses may have
credit, but
felt like.
yeah, yep, absolutely.
Y'all have
Also,
convinced
Alex,
me even more.
Elizabeth pointed out in the email that
Hmm.
that ancient proverb, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend."
Yep.
I always struggle with that, to think about anytime I mention enemy, I don't want anything to do with the enemy, But
That's exactly right. Um, okay, how are we feeling about this? We want to finish up the next few chapters here?
Yeah.
No,
Okay, so where did we leave off? David spends a year and 4 months in Philistine territory. Here's him thinking, oh, I'm going to trick him into believing I'm on their side, even when I'm totally not. I'm acting crazy here. And then we get to 28. And the story shifts from David and what David is doing, and we're going to go back to Saul here in just a minute. The Philistines gather for war. The king of the Philistines, or at least the king of Gath, wants to know, David, are you with us? You're going to fight for us, right? Like you've been hanging out with us. We're friends. How friendly are we? And David says, don't worry about it. I've got your back. Again, we don't know if he really fully intends or if he's being slippery again, but either way, we have a problem here. The king of Israel, anointed by God, is agreeing to fight his own people on behalf of the enemies. Now we go back to Saul for a second. Samuel had died. Second time we're reminded. In other words, there's no one to guide. The spiritual, force of Israel is dead. And there's who are they gonna listen to? And we're told Saul had put the mediums and the necromancers out of the land. So there's no angel on the shoulder in Samuel to guide Saul. And he's done a good job, we think, of getting rid of the bad voices too. So the question becomes, who will he listen to? Where will Saul go for wisdom? Saul tries to inquire of God, and God doesn't answer him. Saul's whole thing here is he's afraid once again because he sees the army of the Philistines. And Chapman points out this time around in Deuteronomy that there just so happens to be this little verse that says this: when you go out to war against your enemies, he said, when you've crossed over into the promised land and you're at war with all these other nations that have horses and chariots and much larger armies than your own, do not be afraid of them. For the Lord your God is with you, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Don't forget the kind of God you serve. This is what Saul cannot wrap his head around. He just can't. He's so afraid every time the Philistine army gathers against him. He cannot believe that God is with him. He tries to inquire of God. God does not answer. Again, because his motivation is fear instead of loyalty to God. He's not actually, I don't think, interested in what God has to say. I just think he wants someone to tell him how to get out of this mess that he's gotten himself into. And so he goes to his servants and he says, okay, seek out for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go and inquire of her. And what we see is they find them at Endor. So has Saul made a decree to get rid of all the mediums? Has he actually carried it out? Not really. It's kind of like a half-hearted effort here. What we see in this woman is that he's able to go to her by night, which shows you he shouldn't be doing what he's doing, right? In the biblical story, when something happens by night, it's like a sign that that's bad news. It's like, what did my mom used to say? Nothing good happens after 11 o'clock? This is kind of like that in the biblical story. He's able to come to this woman, and she knows she shouldn't be there either. Surely you know what Saul has done. I'm not supposed to be here. You're going to get me in trouble. And he says, no, 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 no. Don't worry. Everything's going to be fine. And so again, Saul made a decree, but who's taking it seriously? It doesn't seem to be that he's actually followed through on it. Saul asks for her to call up Samuel. She sees Samuel coming. And this is probably what I think is one of the more tragic moments in this story. There's a lot of them, but this one hurts.
First week of August.
Saul wants to know what to do. He's in great distress. The Philistines are massing. God has turned away from him. He's like hit rock bottom here. He's not getting answers. He has gone through this terrible means to try and find something from Samuel. It's kind of like the apprentice going to their master, like in Star Wars, and just, can someone give me answers? And Samuel has nothing positive to say. Why do you ask me? The Lord has turned from you and become your enemy. That's strong language. The Lord has done to you as he said he was going to do, for the Lord tore the kingdom out of your hand and gave it to your neighbor David. You didn't obey the voice of the Lord. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. In other words, what's going to happen? Your time is numbered. Your days are growing shorter by the moment. In fact, you got one left. I'll see you tomorrow. What must this do to Saul to hear this? He's seeking answers. He's deathly afraid. And now he's being told that he's about to die, and not just him, all of his sons with him. Saul falls on the ground, filled with fear, obviously, devastated. And we get this interesting little story that's easy to brush through. He's got no strength left, which is ironic because one of the things that Saul has depended on is his strength in the numbers of his army, his own strength. Strength has been his, in some ways, weakness. The woman, this medium, comes to him and says, you need to eat something. And he just refuses to eat. And she says, now therefore, you also obey your servant. Let me give you something to eat. Saul's going to listen to her. It takes a minute, but he's going to obey her. Who should Saul have been obeying all this time?
God.
Again,
God.
picture
God.
the two. It's like a silly little image, the cartoon image of the angel and the devil on your shoulder.
Mhm.
He's never listening to this one. And here we're once again going to see him give in to the other voice, the bad voice on his shoulder. This quick little vignette here in verse 24 and 5, the woman has a fattened calf in the house. She kills it. She takes flour, kneads it, breaks it into unleavened bread, and she puts it before Saul and his servants, and they eat. This is not just her giving him food. The description here, Chapman says, is actually reminiscent of rituals, pagan rituals. So not only is she feeding Saul, she is helping him enter into idolatry. And so where we saw David pass the test because there's a voice of wisdom on his shoulder, Saul is failing another test because he is giving in to the other voice on his shoulder. Does this make sense? The two kings that we're seeing here. Again, we're not supposed to see either of them as all bad or all good, just analyzing the choices that they continue to make. Both of them made good choices at one point. Both of them are going to make bad choices at some points. But the author of Samuel is trying to give us wisdom in how do you respond to the voices when you face the test, when you're given a chance to take revenge on your enemies or obey the voice of God or be faithful and not afraid when it looks like the deck is stacked against you. What voice do you listen to? That's the question here that the author is trying to get us to play with. In verse 29, we see that some of the Philistine commanders are kind of smart. They don't trust that David isn't up to no good. They don't want David to fight with him, which I don't know about you. I kind of understand where they're coming from here. I wouldn't want David, who's killed tens of thousands of my people, to fight with me either. Chapman points out that, again, it's unclear whether David is just waiting for the opportunity that when he and his men are back in friendly territory, that they won't turn the tide around and fight the Philistines. We don't know. We never get to learn because David is essentially sent away. The king tries to fight for him, and the other people are saying like, no, we don't trust it, and they end up winning. We get this one little line, though, from Achish, the king, and he says, as the Lord lives, you have been honest. And to me, it seems right away that you should march out in with me in the campaign. I love this moment because he's saying, as Yahweh lives, you're honest, David. He spent over a year with David. Has he kind of gotten the measure of David? Now we could have some fun here. Has David actually been honest with him? No. But either way, we're starting to see that David's time with him has been introducing him to the God of Israel, Yahweh. Is this a little moment of evangelism? Maybe, maybe. Either way, this king has the wool pulled over his eyes because he believes that David is completely honest and that he's going to march with him. But either way, he says, nevertheless, my guys in the back tell me we can't do this. You go back now, go peacefully so that you may not displease the Lord. Politics, y'all, politics. It's been around forever, and here we see it at play.
Well, he called him an angel of God, though.
Yes, yep.
But
In which part? Where is it?
couldn't this also be God protecting David?
It's in line 9, line 9.
Yeah, and Achish answered David and said, I know that you are blameless in my sight as an angel of God, which is again interesting because I don't know that David is so blameless. But either way, he calls him a messenger of God. Messenger of God.
Yeah.
Bill, I think you're spot on. I think that whether it is intentional on David's part or not, this is God making a way for David out of this exile moment where he's with his enemies. Again, whether David would have fought or not, we'll never know. But I think that this is God's way of getting David out of this sticky situation. And we're going to see God do this for David twice in this story and in the very next story. David goes home to this place that he had established with the Philistines. And what do you know? He comes home to find his own home raided. You could argue here, there's this little proverb we find in scripture that says, live by the sword, die by the sword. What have we seen? How has David been making his living? Being a raider. Now his whole family is captured in a raid. Little poetic justice here. Maybe this is God saying this is not how we're going to live our life, right? David is, the people want to stone him. And this, again, we could talk for hours about these stories, but this just goes to show you about leadership, right? If you make the decisions, you take the consequences when everyone else is mad at you. But what does David do? We see it all the time. Strengthens himself in the Lord. He doesn't get up and give up or, go strap on his sword. He strengthens himself in the Lord and he goes to God and asks him what to do. The Lord says, go get your people back. And so he goes. And here we see another moment that separates David from Saul, because where Saul has always acted rashly in the name of having a stronger army or like rushing out into battle, here we have David who is willing to allow 200 of his men. He doesn't have that many. He has 400, right? So half of his men he allows to sit back with him. Or he's 600 and he allows 200 to sit back. So a third of his men to sit back. If you're a military commander and you're on a mission that's really important, is that smart? No. This is David and Goliath all over again. David trusts that God is with him and that it doesn't matter how many soldiers he had, he's going to be fine because God is with him. We get this episode where he finds an Egyptian in the open country who's hungry. He hasn't had food in 3 days. And unlike the idiot Nabal, who doesn't have compassion and isn't willing to give a stranger his food, David is. David stops. He takes care of this man, even though he's on an important mission. In the video I filmed for Friday, I talk about how this reminds me of Jesus and how Jesus is willing to be interrupted to care for people even when he's on mission. So here we see that very character expressed in the anointed king of David. This is a sign in the positive direction. David has compassion on someone who can't possibly help him. This is agape love. And it just so happens to pay off for him because this Egyptian is willing and knows where the Amalekites are and leads David to where they're hiding. And David is able to take them all down and get all his people back. He goes to battle with them Nothing is missing from all the spoils. In fact, he's able to even get more out of the deal. So not only in the beginning of this chapter, we see David in a really tough spot. God's anointed is suffering. But by the end of this chapter, he's been faithful, he's been compassionate, and David is going to end up in an even better position than when he started. Does that remind you of anyone? There we go, the suffering servant who is rewarded in the end. So now David has all these spoils. What would you expect a fair king to do with the spoils of war? What would you do with them? Who would you share them with? You're going to help those who helped you, right? But David gives an equal share to the very people who waited behind, who were too exhausted to go on. Now, again, I think that this exposes something in us when we read it. Because if your reaction is like, he did what? Why would he give this much to people who did nothing to help him? Does that not tell us something about ourselves? These stories act as a mirror to us and expose the pieces in us that need healing. And can you remember the story of the laborers in the vineyard that Jesus tells about those who are
Yes,
late to the party will
the
end up
parable.
making just as much? So the last will be first and the first will be last. This is the character on display here in David. David was the last, the youngest brother, shepherd, right? Last in the hierarchy, a field worker. Saul was first, and yet here we have their positions reversed. Saul is last, and David is first. And David, remembering where he came from, is willing to share the spoils of war with those who are last in line. Does this make sense? A beautiful story here. Again, David is up and to the right. Even if he wobbles, he's still doing pretty good overall. Meanwhile, Saul. And here is the last chapter of the book. It's pretty short and it's pretty tragic. Saul goes up against the Philistines. They overtake him and his sons. Jonathan, the epic Jonathan, who's just been awesome. This whole book is struck down along with all the other sons of Saul. Saul, who can see the end in line, wants his soldiers to kill him so that he doesn't become a symbol for the Philistines to come and torment him. I mean, you kind of can't begrudge him that. The thing is, Saul takes even his death into his own hands. Saul, who has been unwilling to follow God and allow God's path to take part in his life, even unto death, Saul does whatever is good in his own eyes. You kind of can't blame him for this one. It feels logical. But again, Saul is not willing to let God guide him. He's going to take his own life. And he does. The Philistines end up taking land that belonged to Israel. They're going to take Saul's body and put him in the temple of their God. They hang him on the wall like a trophy, just like we saw with the sword of Goliath. This is just a sad moment. And then we get this little bright light. It's like darkness has descended, and here we have a little bright light where way back in the beginning, 1 Samuel, I think 11, Saul had in this first moment of becoming king, in this first moment of, yes, maybe he's going to do the right thing, he had come to the rescue of Jabesh Gilead. And now we see that this little community remembered what Saul did for them. And they go out of their way, put their own lives on the line in order to rescue Saul from the hands of the Philistines, his body. They get him, they retrieve him, they give him a proper burial, and this is where the story ends. There's one thing I want to highlight that I didn't mention that I think bears thinking about. David has, in the stories we talked about here, two opportunities in the dark, when no one else is paying attention, when no one would see, to do the wrong thing. And instead he does the right thing. And I think that should call us to remember what we do in the shadows, what we do when we feel like no one is looking actually matters. What we do in the cave when the people can't see how we're taking vengeance, or the little ways we undercut people, it matters that we do the right thing in the light of day and in the dark of night. And then here at the end of this story, we've seen David in both positive moments and in moments that, we're starting to see a little wobble, right? And so as we enter the book of Second Samuel, we wonder, what kind of king will David be? What voices will he listen to? And we really don't get a break in this book when you would look at the way it was originally written. But I do think that it's worth a good pause before we pick up Second Samuel next week to think about all the lessons we've learned this far from David and Saul's life. We do not become the kind of people who fall overnight. No one wakes up one day and goes out and murders a whole community of priests like Saul did. We got to see the descent into madness. And what I hope you learn from both of these stories, the little decisions we make, the everyday, ordinary decisions toward faithfulness or unfaithfulness, they matter. They add up over time and they lead us in a direction. So no matter if it's the dead of night and you have the opportunity to take vengeance on someone who's done you wrong, or if it's the light of day and you are just consumed with rage, how you respond in those moments really matters. And God is calling you to obey toward faithfulness, toward living the kind of life with compassion and gentleness and faithfulness that He has called His followers to live. So I'm going to stop here. We're a few minutes over. Questions, thoughts, comments? How are you feeling now that we've reached the end of this first chapter? Enjoying it so far?
Yes.
What big lessons are you taking from the first half of this book? What's sticking with you?
Alex, when you talked about David finding that his wife and family and everything had been taken away in Ziklag, remember, while he was away, and then I think that's another thing, because they were the Amalekites, right?
Yeah.
And wasn't Saul supposed to, earlier in the book, he was supposed to utterly destroy them?
Yep.
So I guess the message there that I kind of also thought about was, when you have exactly what you were just saying, any kind of disobedience has consequences, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hard
well
to
said.
realize. Yeah.
It comes back to bite us in ways that we don't anticipate.
Well, isn't that a lesson? And we have to fear God as we obey God.
Or that God actually knows what He's doing, right? Like when God
That's
says for
true,
us not
too.
to do something, it probably means that doing that thing would cause us harm. And don't you think He knows a little better than we do what's coming down the road? Sometimes,
I hope so.
what else? Okay. No one's
David is a picture of the ups and downs of faith. He is sometimes very heroic and very strong, and then other times he fails miserably.
Yeah.
And that gives us a little comfort in knowing that things we've done are in the Bible. The
Yeah.
ups and downs, we can see that reflection.
Yeah, I love what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important because often we treat biblical characters, like David in particular, as if they are the subject of children's stories and it's neat and happy and David is the hero and we should all be like David. When we are going to see, especially in the next half, David is not necessarily always the one worth emulating.
Right.
And I think what's important about that is everyone is going to make mistakes. Saul makes mistakes. David makes mistakes. Even Samuel made mistakes. His kids were not the best, okay? Clearly, he went wrong somewhere along the way. Everyone makes mistakes. What separates Saul from David, what we've already seen and what we'll see again, is how they respond to those mistakes. Do they recognize when they're going down the wrong path and course correct? Or when they're too far gone down the path, do they repent and turn back to God? And ultimately, the number one lesson is, who is their loyalty and allegiance to? David gets hot-headed and tempered sometimes, but it's very clear his ultimate allegiance, even when he messes up, is to God. And we're going to see him respond in ways that makes that very clear. So who is Saul's ultimate allegiance to?
Saul.
Himself.
Saul.
Oh,
Yeah, Saul. And I think that's what's his downfall. And so, yeah, friend, I think you're spot on. We're going to see this reality really take root. All of us make mistakes. That's not the end goal. The end goal is, how do we respond? What do we do in those moments when we realize we're kind of headed in the wrong direction? And
So
that's
it's-
where we're going to see David excel in the next book.
This is a tremendous illustration of the human condition,
Yes.
you know?
Yes,
Yep.
precisely.
Absolutely.
I guess I think of, like, David in history is remembered, like, you hear the name David and it's always followed by the man after God's heart, right? And so history remembers his, shortcomings pretty favorably.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there's hope for all of us, but it's like when you hold up some of the things we talked about tonight, adjacent to a man after God's own heart, I don't know that we saw as much of that as maybe we'll see next week when we have course correct.
Well, here's what I think is so unbelievable about what you're saying and what we're going to see next week. The worst is yet to come for David.
Oh,
What
okay.
we've talked about this week is nothing, like tip of the iceberg compared to what's coming, what you'll read about next week. We're going to see David's fall story. In fact, look for the
Yeah.
language where he sees, some of you know where this is going, where he sees what's desirable and takes it for
He
himself.
takes it into
It's a
advantage.
false story, just as much as Saul's was a false story, just as much as all the other false stories we've ever talked about. And yet he is called a king after God's own heart. And so clearly here, what is not important to God is that we don't ever mess up. What's important is got to be something else. And that's what we're going to see next week. How can we mess up to that degree and yet still become people after God's own heart? At the least, you should leave tonight feeling confident that that's possible. It's not out of the way. If you have ever believed, and I feel strongly about this because this is where I was for a long time, many years of my life. If you believe in any part of your heart that you are too far gone for God, then you've completely missed the point. And that's what David's story shows us more than anything.
true.
And I think if Saul would have just realized that and truly repented, it would have been okay for him too. Okay,
Isn't part of the lesson, we all have a fall story, but yet we all know we have a redemption because
Yeah.
God had to do what he had to do, which was send his only begotten
Yeah.
son to save us all.
Amen.
right. That's right.
Precisely.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Precisely.
Okay.
Great evening. Thank you.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
a great
Yeah,
place to
thank
end
you,
it.
Alice.
Who would be willing to pray for us on the heels of that? Jimmy, can I call on you?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Dear gracious and heavenly Father, thank you for gathering us together here. It's wonderful story and stuff, and this wonderful thing. This is such a great story that give us to sit there and encourage us, because none of us are perfect, Lord, and help us and remember that we do have our times when we do feel like we're in the mountaintop, but also we have a valley. We can feel low, and that when we feel low, but help us to turn to you and know that that you are always there, and you'll never leave us or forsake us, and protect us, and help us not say we're never too far gone to you, Lord, and help us know that you're there and that we can count on you. And I pray this in your son's name, Jesus. Amen.
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 All right.
Amen.
Thank
Thank
you
you
next
all.
week.
Thanks,
you.
Alex.
See you then.
Thanks, Alex.
We're halfway through.
Yahoo.
Bye.
Okay.